brothers Wisp. The brothers Wisp, brothers Wisp. The brothers Wisp. The brothers.
Hey everybody, this is Tommy with the Brothers Wisp. Let's see, March 24th, April 26th. Wow, I have no
Might want
idea
to
what
start
day.
that one again.
Yeah.
No, I'm just gonna let everyone y'all can see just how messed up I am. Over to my
we
left,
use AI to insert mistakes.
Yeah.
yeah. Over to my left is Jeremy with a pre-seam and a Terlo. I can never pronounce that.
We
Right.
should say Adderlow.
Adderlow, great.
Yeah.
Perfect. You're just coming back from BC Broadband, right?
Yep. BC Broadband Conference.
All right. Well, we'll bug you about that here shortly, and then down below me here is Dennis with Link Text, being awesome again. So where are you based? You're back home, right, Dennis?
Yep, I'm in St. Louis.
Yeah. And then Jeremy, you're up in Alaska.
I am still. My home is Anchorage.
Nice. All right. So before we get to the fun of everything, let me see if I can alt tab over to this. Gotta say thank you to our sponsors. The Brothers Wisp is brought to you by Sonar, a scalable, intuitive, and comprehensive ISP billing and operational support system. Learn more at Sonar.Software. Guys, these guys have been supporting since forever.
Awesome.
TowerCoverage.com. Tower Coverage is your RF propagation system to empower your network, real-time data metrics, enable your coverage area, reaching your customer base, and more. The industry's best RF propagation mapping system allows website integration for customer sign-up and pre-qualification. Use this data to scientifically plan network expansion and help your WISP succeed. Get a free trial today at TowerCoverage.com. That's you, Dennis. Is there anything like fun and new and cool with Tower Coverage?
Well, at the beginning of the year, we released our new fiber mapping stuff. That's been out there and people have been using it. We also we do offer down to 1 meter data if it's available. We always are updating our best data set. So like yesterday, we actually had a little area in New Mexico that all of a sudden LiDAR data and 1 meter data became available. We updated all of our servers, pushed it out, and it's now live. So again, we will use the best data that we have or that is available to us, depending on where you're at. So
fun.
Yep.
All right. Well, cool. And then last but far from least, we are sponsored by Preseam. Get a single pane of glass view of your network with Preseam's trusted QoE solution. Using Active Queue Management, Preseam is a set-it-and-forget-it tool that lets you manage your network proactively without any complicated rules or geek knobs. With Preseam, you also get exclusive RF scores and analytics that show you the health of your network across all subscribers, access technologies, and vendors. Premium QoE, precise data, Preseam. And you were just mentioning that you guys have some fiber stuff now, too.
Yeah, that's right. We officially released that. You know, we've had support for fiber for many years, and now we're actually kind of trying to put it on equal footing in our platform with wireless. So that's going really well, and we're excited to see that everybody who was doing wireless often is likely to have a little bit of fiber in their network, and vice versa. Folks who consider themselves, fiber only ISPs are realizing, hold on, we need some of this wireless to reach people that we couldn't reach before, and it's good. It's a good place to be.
Yeah, well, and even I have 600 megabit per second internet to me through fiber, and I'm still more than capable of locking that up. And the MetroNet provides an Eero router which has QoE in it, and I've been like doing video downloads or uploads, and the kids are like, "Hey, what broke? Stop it!" Well, so there's a lot of stuff. We mentioned this at the show WISP America, but I have a link, and I'll put a link to it at the video. Brandon Hardy has his own tower mount. It's for the WaveAP tower mount. And it's tower mounts at myshopify.com. And they're pretty slick and are available, and he's shipping them out. So get them while you can. I know a lot of people were pretty excited about them. So, and they're definitely well built, as everyone.
I took a look at them at the show, and yeah, I have to agree. They looked both well thought out and also well constructed. And it almost made me wanted to go put some radios up, even though I don't. Sound the guys, I don't really do a ton of that anymore. I am wearing this lovely Ranch Wi-Fi hat from Ranch Wi-Fi in California because, for one, it's a really great hat for an internet company, a wireless internet company, but also it's got a logo of Longhorns where the head of the bull is a Wi-Fi signal strength indicator. But also, I think it goes really well with my mustache.
It does. It goes really well with the mustache. I think that's beautiful branding. Like, a lot of the times we WISP are very technical people, and we don't put a lot of effort into making marketing stuff look pretty. But that's really well done. Like, I
think it degrades gracefully too, in the sense that if somebody doesn't quite get the Wi-Fi part, they'll get the ranch part, right? They're going to understand that it's a Longhorn.
Yeah, yeah. And
I think we just put more conversation and more thought into a hat than they did.
Ben is a architect and designer. I'm sure he put the right amount of thought.
Yeah.
He's a sharp guy.
Yeah, he probably did, and I appreciate that. Well, so speaking of architecting stuff, net neutrality is back, baby. Yeah, we needed this. This is gonna be wonderful. Glorious. I warned people. I told you they're going to bring it back. Actually, so I've been reading through the FCC order, and as usual, FCC is extremely well thought out and took a bajillion commentary and read looks like basically everything. They directly quote WISPA multiple times. They reference individual consumer stuff, and we're now going to be Title II. What's your initial reactions?
Well, I was around for the first time this thing passed.
Yeah.
It really didn't make any significant difference to me in rural Alaska because there weren't any poles that I could get attached to. Like, that was something that would be a benefit, and WISP, I think, has been public about that. They were quoted here, comment 71. There's no question that broadband-only providers would benefit from the pole attachment rights. I think that's still going to vary significantly based on your local environment. So what works out well for one WISP may be of no benefit to another. That's always been the case here. So I really have tried to stay out of the political side of it. I ran a regulated service. I ran a telco for about 20 years. And in general, for the little guys, the regulation didn't, it provided an environment in which they could, provide a service that would never pay for itself otherwise, being regulated as a utility. I'm not certain that even that Title II really makes what's the word here? I'm trying to make this a non-political opinion here. It's like, I'm not certain that we're ever going to actually see internet be regulated in the precise same way. It's like we want the rights and privileges, but we don't want the work of being an actual regulated utility, where, for example, you have a common access layer that's kind of publicly owned or semi-publicly owned, and then the ISPs are competitive on top of that. I can talk a little bit more about that in the context of the BC Broadband Conference that I was just at when we get around to that. But I really don't think it's going to change a great deal for many providers. WISP has been very vocal about the ways in which the burden of paperwork is going to hurt small WISPs, and I really appreciate that WISP is doing that. But this appears to be a football that gets tossed back and forth depending on who's in the White House, and so I guess I have a pretty jaded view about the whole thing. From the neutrality side of it, I think that people, the stuff I read on the internet is certainly saying, hey, this is a win for consumers. Well, I would hope so, if it really is. I just am not certain that consumers were suffering too badly already,
Yeah.
right? I
Yeah.
think it's one of those theoretical things where there were some bad actors in the past where consumers weren't being well treated. And I'm not certain that we're in that same environment today. So rather than, you see these clickbait headlines, which is like, this is a loss for ISPs. Well, if that were true, then theoretically it would be a win for consumers. I don't think either of those things is really clear.
Yeah, I would argue that it wouldn't, like, I mean, it's a loss for ISPs in that, okay, now you're going to be more, there is more, the FCC is saying that they want to have you report when you have large scale extended outages. So that's a frustration for a lot of guys.
Even defining what an outage is can be difficult. Yeah.
Yeah, and that hasn't been clearly defined yet. And I would say, like, so the FCC, like their argument was really, like, a lot of service providers and WISP were saying, like, hey, this isn't a problem anymore. Like, this is, the market has said people want open internet that's not regulated, and
Right.
the FCC's arguments were like, a lot of what they referenced was like people who like used a VPN to get around the limitation of like that Netflix is running really slow, but other services were working just fine. Well,
I see.
I mean, it's not, probably wasn't your service provider. It was like, the reference was Frontier and some cable company. And it probably wasn't Frontier or that cable company limiting. It was that Frontier or that cable company's port going to Netflix was full. And when you went on the VPN, you go out around that full port and you went across the port that was less full. Like,
but presumably Frontier and Netflix have enough incentive to solve that and fix that congestion problem, right? Because they know that that's going to be a poor experience for their customers.
True. Yes. And and assuming that they have network engineers that are noticing this and are like, okay, yeah, we need to.
Big assumption, unfortunately.
Yeah, big assumptions. So, but I struggle with the other side of it, because we're seeing a lot of the smaller guys were like, oh, hey, there's these tools that we can use to limit video streaming bandwidth or like video game updates, and do it based on time or whatever. And it's like, yeah, you aren't doing it. Look, you aren't limiting just Netflix or whatever. Although there are tools that allow you to do just Netflix or such. But I've seen people being like, oh yeah, I'm limiting video streaming to individual customers to a certain amount so that they don't max out their plan, and they're happy, and I'm even happier because I don't have to invest in infrastructure, which the FCC is directly saying, like, this is a problem. Instead of investing in your infrastructure, you are investing in a cheaper solution that doesn't actually solve the problem. So
it may solve the problem. It just doesn't. It adjusts their availability of their bandwidth that they should be getting.
Yeah, the consumer, the problem being there's not enough bandwidth to get to the consumer for what they want.
Oversubscription is going to occur at some point. And I think that there was always room, even under the previous rules, for traffic solutions of that nature, and it was just a situation where you really had to be very clear about what you were doing and disclose that to your customers so that they could make a good informed market choice, an informed decision. Absolutely, Dennis. And the broadband labeling, I think, fits into that as well, where I really think that, under that framework, an ISP would have the right to do anything that it wanted as long as it fully disclosed it to its customers. Now, as a consumer, I want the operator that's not going to, as Adair says, molest my traffic. But it presupposes, the idea that there is choice presupposes that everybody has choice, and not everybody does.
Right.
Even now that you've got Starlink everywhere, the economics may not support it. Right. The people who can only afford a $30 a month plan, you don't want them to be in a situation where they've got the bottom of the barrel plan where, like, all you can get is Meta so you can see, and Google to get Facebook ads, and you can't, and all of the rival services that aren't being subsidized by the big giants, all of those, take a slower path. I think that was a possible future that the FCC was wanting to forestall, and because it's still a possible future. I really do think so.
And I mean, look at Netflix. They have an ad streaming price now, where you get like 3 ads per every 45 minutes or something like that. But I mean, they save you money, or you don't pay as much to get that. So those
for a degraded
ads,
experience.
right. But that is it's coming. Yeah.
So the thing they do explicitly block is paid prioritization. So you can do it, like if the consumer knows and is happy with it, you can do it. But if you cannot go to some other company. So like Frontier can't go to Netflix and be like, hey, you have to pay us for prioritization to our customers.
From the content providers.
Yeah.
Right.
Which I think, and a service provider, what FCC is calling a broadband internet access service.
Biased.
Yeah, biased. That they're getting paid once. They should not, even if they have a massive customer base, they shouldn't be being paid twice. Once by the consumers, and then once again by Netflix, Google, anyone else who's trying to deliver services that the consumers want.
And that is the next logical step from the ISP limiting Netflix. Because if you were to say, okay, what makes the economics favorable? Well, clearly they're already getting all the money they can out of the subscriber. So the only company they could shake down would be the content provider, right? That's going to be Netflix.
And we're seeing that all over the world. I've seen India, Taiwan, other countries have these, major telecom providers who are saying, "Oh, it costs us so much money to deliver Netflix. We want money from Netflix and Google and such."
Right. And it's definitely one of those things where, the last thing I feel is like, oh, the poor content provider, right? They're the ones who are at least making some money off the deal. In practice, generally providing the pipe is more lucrative. That's always been the case. However, a situation where you find a completely pay to play everywhere, where it's not, the opposite of an open internet. It's open. It needs to be open in the sense that a new startup is not financially disadvantaged because they don't already have the economies of scale that the big guys have. And I think that's a legitimate concern and fear. Now, I'm not certain that Title II is the way to go about it. I never felt that was true. Again, not trying to express political opinions here. It's just that Congress hadn't really given the FCC the right tools to actually achieve those goals without, that's why I think the challenges that come to the, that are raised against this may actually put us in a more interesting position, because we really need to get past some of the legacy legislation that was designed for an earlier era. So I don't consider it to be this is definitely not the end, right?
Yeah, no, there's definitely going to be a lot of adjusting and changing things. So since we don't have him on here, but he brings it up every single time something like this is brought up, John Osmond's philosophy of, if you have equipment in the public right of way, you cannot sell to the end consumer. You have
the other kind of open access.
Yeah. That's a pretty hard line, and I know that no service provider is interested in that.
Well, there are countries in the world where that's true.
Okay, which examples would you have?
Well, so in lots of places in Europe where you have significant competition for the actual consumer. As I just came back from BC Broadband Conference, they have a reseller program where the incumbents, you could think of those as the LECs, but in this case, it's people who own the equipment in the right of way, whether that's cable or fiber. They have to, at a set price, make that port available. So if you are a cable reseller, you can provide whatever equipment you want that's compatible with the DOCSIS standard. One advantage of open standards there, and you own that customer. They're calling you for support, right? That can have its disadvantages too, particularly in places where there really isn't the population density to support it. I can't opine on how well that works in Canada. Certainly in parts of Europe where there is sufficient competition, and I mean competition for the consumer, not competition in the right of way. The head of Comcast said a few years ago, competition in the last mile destroys value, which is, when you think about it from a physical resource perspective, is absolutely true. Nobody wants competition with multiple sewer providers and multiple power providers, really, or multiple gas providers coming to your house. That would be a mess. We don't need that, but we still need the consumer to be free from monopolistic practices. So by competing for that, that actual customer eyeball, if you will, a customer dollar, you then provide some differentiation of services and some actual competition where it does matter. All those, like, do these people have better Netflix, right? who's got the better deal there? Right. There are certainly countries in which we have less successful examples of that happening. I'm sure that the regulatory environment is really critical here. If you're going to actually regulate the physical side as a utility and then allow the competition for the logical side, because that doesn't, why would that have to be exclusive, right? It's just bits, right? Yeah. It's just bits and data centers at that point. That's where it does make sense to have competition. Is that what John talks about, Dennis? Did I represent that correctly?
Yeah. I mean, basically it's, we actually do one customer that they actually have built out a large scale fiber network in their county. The county has built it, and they do not sell internet access at all. All they do is you get to one of their points of presence, you can plug into a 10 gig port, and then magically everything's out and they can do anything else that they need to do. It's just transport across that network. So, again, I think that there's definitely pluses and minuses to doing that. And that is a really good example of a county or a state or a government entity putting the money in to get access to all those people and to have multiple price points for the last mile. I think that's a good thing. The whole Title II thing right now, as it stands, as far as most ISPs, I've had a number of ISPs already call me up, say, hey, what do we need to do? I go, honestly, nothing. Everything's working. You're not blocking anything that you shouldn't be blocking, and you're not asking a content provider to pay you for transit. So other than you still need, and I always told them this before, you still need to disclose your network management practices. You still need to disclose your privacy policy, your terms of service, just like that. It should be disclosed. But they still leave a lot of room, I guess, wiggle room. What is a reasonable network management practice?
Yeah, it's never really been truly defined, which
right.
I think that's actually not bad that it hasn't been thoroughly defined. Yeah. It's like, well, defend it, right? Yeah. We'll see what happens. Right. I don't want to spread FUD there, but yeah, it's there because I think that was always the case. Like that you could do almost anything that was reasonable. Like it's not really reasonable, I would argue, to just simply limit one particular type of application onto the internet because you don't have big enough pipes. Yeah. Right? That doesn't seem reasonable to me.
Yeah. So the exact example was drawn up. They have a 2 gigabit link. They usually do about 600 to a gig of traffic on a nightly basis. And that link went down, and all they had was a 300 meg backup. Okay. Well, they had to order equipment. So it was going to be 2 or 3 days before they could get back up there and fix it. And they're like, so what do we do? I go, well, you put in there, we reserve the right to modify and slow down traffic in reasonable network congestions, correct? Yeah. Guess what? All you have to do is slow down everybody equally.
Right.
As long as you slow down everybody, so you go into Microtech, you put a queue and say, hey, everybody behind this, we have 300 meg, share it. Now, on the flip side of that, let's go into hotspot zone. Let's say you have a hotspot and you are offering a free hotspot or a paid hotspot. And again, it's not traffic prioritization, but the free hotspot, all you're allowing them to do is basically get on port 80, 53, and 443. Is as long as you disclose that, they can't bitch. Nobody can complain.
And even then, that's clearly not the same service as
Correct.
BIOS, basic
Correct.
internet access service. It's
Correct.
something that you're providing as a public good is very
Correct.
different from where you have an actual contract with the end customer.
Right.
Yeah, and that was the first couple first sentences. This is only for consumer broadband. Like if you're selling to businesses, this doesn't apply to
that's
you at all.
business limit.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, and we've had at Preseam, because we don't do per application throttling precisely for the reasons you described, Dennis. That it's actually cheaper and easier to just shape everything equally.
Right.
It's both net neutral and future proof. Not to plug my product, I'm just saying, like they, companies that have said, well, we still have business relationships where we want to be able to shape that traffic. They've had to use other solutions, and it's a choice.
Yeah.
They can do anything they want when there's a contract that allows that and specifies that. In some cases, requires it. Like when you say, I want the ISP to block ports for me. That's probably a sensible business decision.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And that was actually another one was, what about inbound ports that I block? I go, well, we block from 21 to 25, 80, 80, 81, 81, all the common remote router management ports, and port 80 and 443 inbound to residential users only. As long as it's in the terms and in the disclosure, and there is in this particular case, you will have a ability to remove those if
there's a mechanism.
Yeah, there's a mechanism.
The consumer needs it. Yeah.
Right. It's not complicated. So, it is what it is. But for the most part, 99.9% of ISPs or WISPs out there it's not going to change their day-to-day life. I do know that there's a number of fiber providers that the pole attachment rights are really advantageous for them. However, like in our area, they've always had, we could get on it. The problem is it's basically $1,000 a pole to do the make ready.
Right.
And when we look at the cost in the number of houses that we're going to pass, dude, it doesn't, the math doesn't add up. So as long as they have that and they offer it, it's nothing that we're going to use, but it is what it is.
I mean, one benefit is that the FCC is saying, it has to be reasonable cost. $1,000 a pole, that's an unreasonable cost.
You're saying that's unreasonable. That raises another question, Tom.
The problem is they have people paying it. So what do you call reasonable? That's a whole, if I'm a $1 trillion company or a $1 billion company, $1,000 a pole is reasonable.
Well, I mean, not really. You still have to break even.
Yeah, you do.
Someday.
It depends on how many people are being passed by that pole.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
Tommy, since you've been reading this, this is relevant here with this whole question about, is the FCC allowed to step in when ISPs are prevented from building out? So, like in this case, it's an economic prevention. Another example would be states and municipalities that have actually enacted legislation which prevent muni networks, corporately or publicly owned networks from being built. Like, I think both sides of that are things that are, potentially harmful to the consumer. Now, I mean, the arguments have been against muni networks is that they've been saying, well, we don't want public competition with private business.
Yeah, and
right. But we've just argued that there are cases where it makes sense for the public to actually own the utility. Like, I own part of the utility that brings me,
internet,
brings things to my house. Why should I not own part of the internet as well?
So it doesn't. So they don't talk specifically about the municipality owned, but if the municipality was wanting to be a BIOS provider, then it could very well, the FCC might be able to jump in on that. And that would be kind of a gray area. What it does specifically talk about is the use of public right-of-ways and other public resources by BIOS providers the FCC will be says that they will be stepping in and overruling, towns, cities, counties, and states because they
they
brought
can't
up
block
examples.
a private ISP from using those.
So
Correct.
I think there's the specific example, and that is the cable. What is it? Franchise agreements.
Right.
There are counties and cities that want a WISP to get a cable franchise agreement to be able to deploy in their town, and or fiber. Okay. The question is that legal or not?
So they don't specify in that regard whether or not they're going to like exact examples of where they're going to. They just say this is a problem and we've been seeing it. They mention like telephone pole access and making that is like a big thing to them. Right. They also talk a lot about how mobile provider MVNOs that were only broadband were disadvantaged against broadband MVNOs that did broadband and cellular. By doing this, that makes them all level playing field, so they're no longer just Title 1, they're Title 2, and so everybody gets to. So basically, everyone gets treated like a telephone.
Because voice should be just one other application in the data world.
Correct. Yeah. And
so rather than like declassifying voice as a telecommunications service, they're basically saying, "Hey, we'll make data be telecommunications as well."
Yes. Correct.
And that I think has been a lot of the dispute because of all of the historical regulations that have risen around telecommunications services.
Yeah, I mean, I think the very last thing on the whole Title II is really the reporting aspect. The question is does a outage or a partial outage have to be reported, who you're reporting to, etc. And again, that is honestly at this point in time up to their lawyer to figure out what Title II, the current rules and regulations say.
So we need to follow Commission Network Outage Reporting System. Qualifying service providers are required to report to the Commission network outages that satisfy certain criteria. So we would fall under whatever the rules are for NORS. And I believe that was an outage that lasted more than 6 hours in any single day for one or more customers.
So there you go. I mean, that's what you will have to, the reporting requirements was one of the big things at the last time, because we did have Title II before. Did we ever report? No, we didn't. But again, the issue is that now this is here. What are the extra reporting requirements? Are there anything else that we have to report as a Title II provider?
Yeah. So besides that, so there's outage. You need to be able to provide any, like, so if you use your customer data for advertising or whatever, FCC is going to want you to be able to provide that to them if they want it, for whatever the reason is. And then if you're reselling that information, you can't have separate agreements. It just has to be a flat, if you are reselling customer data, you have to offer that to anybody and everyone.
So they haven't banned it. They're just trying to regulate it a little bit.
Yeah.
Correct.
To know about it. Yeah. And it's only on an as needed basis. So again, I'm more interested in what are like the BDC. That is a required filing 2 times a year.
Correct.
What's the real burden to a little guy?
What's the real burden for it? Yeah. Right.
Yeah. There doesn't look to be any annual reporting.
So again, it doesn't really, it's not really changing anything for 99.9% of ISPs out there, to my knowledge.
Let's see, 342. Give me a second. Scroll down to that.
WISP is still advocating that there be a carve out anyway for under 250,000. Which historically they've been pretty successful with that approach. So I'm fingers crossed. That it won't be too much of a burden.
Yeah, so they didn't mention that carve out, or at least I haven't found a mention of that.
I don't believe we got it yet.
Yeah. So
Yeah, I don't think. Yeah,
'cause-
it's in the process of petition, right?
yeah. Source information. Yeah, and we can collect a vast swaths and not for bear product line, but yeah, this is just
A lot of words.
I'll
Yeah.
mention I'll mention
Yeah,
I'll probably do something, but there is like the public safety stuff. There might be something. You have to do it through NORS and DIRS, and that's really the only new reporting is the outages that I have found so far. If I find something else, I'll mention it to people later on. But NORS satisfy requirement. It's a bit of a mess. I have not looked at that, but that is a really good question to make certain. But I don't know. I think we're gonna actually have real lawyers looking at this stuff. Jeremy, Jeremy and Dennis, I think we can say, for now, operate as normal. Don't do bad things that you know are bad, and upgrade your infrastructure as much as you can.
There you go.
What would you say about what you mentioned BC Broadband Conference that you just came from?
So that's a regional, British Columbia, the westernmost, southwesternmost province there in Canada, practically our neighbors here, and they have a small but passionate broadband conference that Bob Allen, who's run a WISP for many years, and still run it, but he sold the majority of his operations to what is TELUS, one of the national providers there in Canada. But he's been running this conference for 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is the 19th consecutive or 19th total, because there was a year off for COVID, 1 or 2 years off for COVID. So they had a lot of useful discussion. I mean, some big vendors, Sienna, Calix, obviously, Toronto was there. Reliance Geo was there. They're doing a lot of really interesting things in addition to the Mimosa acquisition. I had a booth last year, didn't have a booth this year, but I did give some presentations on our fixed wireless report, helping people understand things that they may know intuitively about how broadband is served, but to see hard numbers, particularly for people who aren't actually serving bits. Some of these things are surprising and non-intuitive, even just to us what seems like a simple concept of oversubscription. As we've talked about here today with traffic shaping, it can be a complicated issue. So the one takeaway that I really appreciated was understanding that, what the scope of what fixed wireless is in Canada. During the build out to 5010, which is their broadband benchmark, universal service objective that's still in place, they were at 5010 while we were at 25.3, but they're probably not going to move to 100 megabits as a broadband objective quite as quickly. My understanding is that they're not really funding wireless anymore, although for a while the government was funding quite a bit. In Canada overall, they're reporting that they have about 825,000 retail broadband subscribers. That would be about 2%, which really isn't terrible, 300 providers or so. So, we look at it as similar to kind of the size of Texas in terms of population. They're very close, and we have a lot of friends in Texas, witnessed by my ranch hat here. It's interesting to see that you still have this hybridization going on, independent of government funding. You're finding that people who, the capital that was there for fiber is really actually slowing. There's not much taste for pushing fiber further and further into parts of the world where it isn't going to pay for itself. So there's still lots of wireless going on, and then vice versa. I talked to a number of WISPs who are getting into fiber. They're like, I need to run fiber backhauls, or I'm going to microwave into a neighborhood and then put fiber in. So it's really cementing my belief that I've been predicting for many years now, that in the future it'll be really hard to tell. We're just going to say ISP, And that ISP is going to use wireless. They're going to use fiber. They may even own a cable plant, right? DOCSIS 4 is going to be symmetric 10 gig, So
if you're two inches away from the the node.
Well, that's the thing. Even a cable provider, they just have to keep pushing fiber further and further out, right?
Correct.
I often use the analogy with wireless that the only difference between a fiber provider and a fixed wireless provider is that there's just one more wireless hop, because it's all that where you're going is wireless to the handset at the end user. I was looking at some other data. It was comparing different ISP technologies, wireless technologies, and the fact that a given handset has to be able to support a huge array of them. Like at least 80% of bits are happening on Wi-Fi. They're not happening on cellular. It was in the context of 5G network slicing.
Oh yeah.
Where we're talking about providing kind of pay to play, if you will, or let's say the user can push a button in the app and get priority for a particular type of data. It's one of those things that it really feels to me like a solution looking for a problem, because that's a tiny percentage. The amount of time that they're going to actually be able to usefully do that, since you have no control of what network that end user is on. They can roam off that 5G onto 4G, and then your network slicing is no good anymore, right? In a fixed world, like if I were a fixed operator offering fixed services over 5G, that would make sense. Or to a business, private 5G. All of that makes total sense. But in the mass market where you have a roaming handset, 5G network slicing does not seem to be very, very practicable. So as much as we think of fixed wireless as being a success, the real success is Wi-Fi in the home. Right, and the technology we use to get there is I hope of lesser importance to our success.
Yeah. So I bet. So bouncing off of your comment on slicing. Well, and yes, right now it is a solution looking for an exact problem, but it kind of is like I need my application to have a have some sort of reliability. I need something. VoIP would be the big thing.
Yeah.
But that's what everybody is always brings back is I need to be able to prioritize stuff. Guys,
and the mobile networks have classically done that, because you do need to prioritize voice as an application.
So, but I'm seeing more and more Wi-Fi and such having capabilities. Like guys are deploying actively Google Orion inside of their networks. If you're doing managed routers, there's no reason to not use set up Google Orion unless your equipment doesn't support it, which just is like you need WPA enterprise something with radius support, basically. And what that does is it creates a new Wi-Fi SSID that mobile providers can then the cell phone will see. It'll report back and say, hey, do you want me to connect to this? And if the AT&T says, yes, I want you to connect to this, that cell phone will then connect to that SSID, transfer data, anything that it's doing across that.
Cellular offloading.
Yeah, and then AT&T pays you for that offloading. Well, as a service provider, like this is just free money.
It's free money, yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So... Yep, and MikroTik supports it. I think Ubiquiti also. They were saying they have it's coming. It's either coming or it is supported in Unify. All the big Wi-Fi access point providers have support for it. And I guarantee you, all the all the fiber companies. I think Calix supports it. But like all the fiber modem companies are going to be like, yeah, we need to do this because this is money from sitting on the table for our.
I have a business license. I should set it up at home and see if it generates anything.
Yeah, then AT&T will pay you.
You're right, exactly.
So then, Jeremy, what you need to do is like start downloading like the Internet Archive on your phone. And then you can maybe get your cell phone bill.
All the big downloads go on the Orion system. Yeah, that's right. Because I've got this bit. I'm going to use those bits regardless.
Yeah, it's actually really funny. I should look at doing. Well, unfortunately, Verizon doesn't do that yet on Google Orion. But so with that coming out, like it's not really super complicated, but it is connected to a really complicated backend. And so Google's providing the backend for that. All you have to do is a little bit of setup on your end. And Google's providing, now they get a cut of what you're making, but if Google is willing to do that, maybe they'll be willing to set up some sort of slicing stuff. They peer with you or whatever. I could see stuff like this becoming more and more possible for Wi-Fi providers. Traditionally, we just provide a layer 2 connection on Wi-Fi that you password, but that's like, we have technology and very smart access points going out to provide good Wi-Fi connectivity. I think you could see this slicing technology come to a local internet service provider without a heck of a lot of changes in the world. Well, not a heck, but a lot of changes are happening to make that possible.
Yeah, we did one particular customer with the Orion stuff. They wanted to deploy. They had about 800-ish microtex out there, and we pushed it all out using our cloud management service. Literally, once we tested it, worked or it seemed to work, we pushed it out in about 5 minutes to all those 800 customers. And keep in mind the ISP owns their routers, so there you go. But I don't know how much money they're making off of it, but they said they're happy as can be.
So so then here's the next question then. What do you need to have in your agreement to make certain that your customers aren't going to get pissed?
It would just be like Comcast or Charter or Spectrum. I mean, they have their own SSID. And if you are like in Spectrum, if you have your SSID and you go to another home that has Spectrum, your phone will automatically connect to their SSID and use internet.
I think it asks for consent sometimes.
Yeah,
but it says, "Hey, there is a service available. Do you want to use it?" If I recall correctly, like Boingo.
Yeah, for the Spectrum. Yeah, for the Spectrum.
So
and
it's not. It doesn't force the user to do anything. It provides additional options. My only concern would be like if you, as an ISP, have set up a bunch of SSIDs. Maybe you're doing, different. Maybe there's an IoT SSID. There's a certain point of diminishing returns where adding more SSIDs absolutely harms your airtime. But if you're to have a single one and you're adding a second one, that makes sense. I would be more concerned about like going from 3 to 4 because there's a big drop in total available airtime due to the beaconing. In a perfect world, you would have something like parallel radios in that router where that maybe just on an adjacent channel where that's not even impacting the home user's internet anyway, right? And that's outside the envelope of, obviously that needs to be outside the envelope of their subscription.
Yeah. So then that's actually a really good point. It's like if you're providing a bunch of different SSIDs, throwing another one, it would be a bit of an issue. I just feel like, okay, a lot of WISP, you're the customer, the end customer, plan is going to be a significant portion of what you are selling to them as far as what their equipment is capable of. So like if you have Ubiquiti 5AC radios, you're going to be selling 50 megs to the customer. Totally possible, totally capable of doing that. But okay, the radios maybe can do 200. Well, somebody connects to the Wi-Fi, you do this Orion stuff, and there's 100 megs going from their radio to the access point. Like, how is that going to affect your end customer? I get worried on the WISP side because the pipe to the customer is just so much more limited.
You in Hotspot 2.0, you can define how much bandwidth they're going to get. Oh,
right, and you probably could. Can you?
And that's all part of part of the Orion configuration.
Okay.
So
then you can say, hey, you're only going to get so much speed through me. Okay,
and that would be a interesting, since that does need to be outside the customer envelope in an environment where Dennis was describing it, where those 800, like were those backhauled over wireless as well, or were those all wired customers, Dennis?
They had a mix. They have their fiber, they have wireless, they have MDUs that are both fed by licensed wireless and then it goes Ethernet. So it was a big mix of stuff.
I think that if you were being super conscientious about it, fixed wireless world, you would not enable it on APs where there's no available airtime, because theoretically you've already sold that.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to double sell that, right? So that and in most WISPs in my data set, there really aren't a high percentage. Like, it's rare to see a WISP where like more than 10% of their APs are actually overloaded, right? It's usually I have a few problem children, and so from a revenue perspective, those are going to be your busiest customers, but it's not going to hurt you to still continue to provide a good experience to your retail customers. Either that or some sort of queue where it's a best effort service, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's not something that customers have been pressuring us to provide at Preseam, but I'm sure we could figure out how to do that, and then everybody would be happy, right? You'd still get revenue from it. But my assumption is also that probably tends to be more like daytime when you're not where you would normally be, right? The case where you're going and visiting in a friend's house is probably kind of more of the the general exception, right?
Mm-hmm.
So whereas somebody in a retail business, you're going to see a lot more of that happening than at a residence.
Right.
So
Yeah.
it might be a non-problem from a traffic management perspective. My assumption is that the peak of that is probably off peak.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But I had said I don't have data. That's just my assumption.
Yeah.
So, Jeremy, you were mentioning Tirana was at BC Broadband. Was Cambium there?
Cambium was not. Some distributors, but I did not see any Cambium hardware at the show.
Just recently I've been seeing more and more posts on WISP Talk, and actually somebody was just saying, is Cambium going to hit their market numbers for this quarter? And there was resounding no, with a lot of different thoughts, feelings, and complaints.
Let me rephrase that. John Seaman was there. He's the regional. I've got a good friend of mine going back many years, and he was, we were talking about availability of 6 gigahertz and what's happening in the pipeline, and it did sound like there maybe stuff that's some availability, but I think your mileage may vary, right, in terms of finding stuff in the channel, and it is going to be interesting to see what actually happens. I know we want to talk about the 4000s.
Yeah, 4000s are a lot of people have been complaining about a lot of different bugs that have and that aren't getting fixed. Dennis, do you have some? I'm certain you've run into a bunch of this stuff.
We do service quite a bit of Cambium equipment, but most of it's just the 450Ms. For the price, the 450Ms have there has been a recent downtick in price on those. I'm assuming because of both 6 gigahertz and the Tirana gear. The Tirana gear, anybody that's buying Tirana gear is typically buying it in such bulk that they're getting significant discounts as well. I'm pretty sure that Tirana beat Cambium to the 6 gigahertz market, which is very odd. But also note that they just released, Tirana's, their APs they just released. So I don't know if Cambium was, asleep at the wheel for that, or if there was something else occurring. I have not seen any of the 4000 bugs. I have not even played with any of the 4000 radios, but the 450Ms, they're rock solid so far anyway.
They're mature now at this point. Yeah, they're
right.
well understood. Yep.
Right. And they cost in comparison to Tirana, they cost significantly less.
Well, you don't have to pay for a subscription for the CPE.
I actually operate off of a Tirana radio at my home. The latency on it is not awesome. Okay, we average
some
between,
jitter there, aren't you?
Yeah, we have between 15 and 60 milliseconds of latency to my first hop, which is at the tower. And the jitter is significant. I know exactly what Toronto is doing. They're doing nothing new. They just finally been able to package it up into a CPE that can, chuck out the horsepower to make it work.
Right.
So it's nothing new. I'm pretty sure that Cambium thought that going that method, because Cambium can do the same thing. It's not like it's secret technology, but their issue is the cost of making those radios would be prohibited, and what we're actually seeing is the cost is actually not prohibited, or is not being
Prohibited.
Yeah, it's the cost is not too high. 13 grand for an access point to me is stupid. And you sit there, even if you get $100 accounts, do the math, man. It adds up real quick. Now, if you can get 24 or 36 months out of it, well, maybe. But again,
it's deploying in an environment where you really have the customer base to make that work, because their argument is for that AP, you're replacing a lot of coverage. And that argument does seem to be borne out by the actual RF performance.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So you wouldn't deploy that in a place where you've got 10 subscribers within 5 square miles, right?
Right. And this goes back to the whole, you have to use the tools in your toolbox.
Use the right tool.
You can't sit there and say, I'm a ubiquity only shop. Because that's always going to lose. You have different tools for every different type of classification of AP and tower that you put up. So but I'm pretty sure that was really where Cambium was, and now Toronto's really reaping the benefits. I still personally feel that Toronto, when they announced the product, was like 3 weeks after the BEAD money was announced. I just find that
where the customer. Yeah, if you look ahead and see where broadband funding is going, and you say, well, if the customer is going to be the government and we're competing against fiber, there's a market there. Another significant feature, I would say, of the Toronto chipset is the fact that they have independent channel carriers. Mm-hmm. Because as we increase in the amount of spectrum that's available, that's not available everywhere. Anywhere where you're around 6 gigahertz, where there is anything like a communications corridor. Yeah. That 6 gigahertz, like where I used to live in central Alaska, there's no 6 gigahertz available. and there's no, and in some cases, like it's on the mountaintops, so shooting above you. In this case, it's right down in one of those little long lines towers. Right. It's right there in the middle of town. So if you're going to be putting up Toronto gear and you need more spectrum than you're going to have available in the 5 gigahertz band, you need to be able to combine that. You need 3 and 5, you know. So with multiple carriers. So that's another thing where had Cambium done a completely flexible, and I think that's going to be a feature of the next version of the 450, if I recall correctly. They're gonna do that as well. But being able to split carriers and move them around, to have some of them be coordinated and some of them be unlicensed, like that's all going to be critical to, really having a flexible solution that fits all of the different deployment environments that you might see just even in a single WISP.
Right. And it's the same thing with LTE. I mean, we have LTE providers, Verizon and AT&T, that they're putting 5 gigahertz up on their towers. Why? Because they're not really worried about penetration, but the amount of spectrum availability and speed that they can get on the downstream side to your handset is absolutely insane compared to their limited little blocks that they have. Yeah, so, they're doing carrier aggregation. They're taking multiple bands, multiple frequencies, and they aggregate it all as much as they can.
Yeah. So, carrier aggregation has been a thing in the LTE space for a while now. And WISPs have been wanting it forever. So it's nice to finally be seeing some of that coming out, hopefully. But I've been seeing a lot of people are like, well, why is Cambium making fiber products? And now it does make sense in my book. Like
everybody's going
to have one management interface.
Yeah. CN Maestro is actually a very powerful tool that Ubiquiti has time and time again not been able to replicate.
Right. It's a good product.
They make similar and free, and CN Maestro, most of its stuff is free. But as far as a everything that you can control across your whole network. It's insane. And there's probably some WISPs out there that are like, oh heck yeah, I'd love it that I can just plug this new fiber stuff in and it all looks the same to my networking people and engineering people. So
I'm really hoping that the 4,000 bugs get worked out. That's really the next evolution of the line, and we're hoping that they get enough deployed that we can then start reporting numbers on those to the industry. And I think statistically, looking at their track record, they're probably going to be able to fix them. But the question is always, and this happens anytime you have a new chipset or a new line enter the market. I mean, just think how long it took to work out all the bugs in the first gen Mimosa gear. That was, the first ones hitting 256 QAM, or in, pick a vendor, name it. There is just this burn-in period where you say, well, it's good enough to go to market, but I bet you there's bugs that we don't find in the lab because the lab is a controlled environment and the world is not. And so you really have to get it out and get it in people's hands. And some people end up being, maybe unwilling, but they end up being the early adopters who really are doing the rest of the community a service by trying. And then it doesn't always succeed. Look at TV white spaces. Some people have tried that for a very long time and finally had to throw up their hands and say, yeah, this isn't going to work for this particular application. So there's a little bit of that too, where sometimes maybe you weren't the right one to test something, or it wasn't quite the right application, and it might work for somebody else. But I don't see any signs that's going to be a failure. Another thing that's really interesting is that Cambium just doesn't quite have a competitor to the Wave, right? And as we talked about with the WaveAP, the Cambium 60 gigahertz stuff, it's relatively solid. I don't think it's it's certainly not anything to be embarrassed about. It's a very different product, right?
Yeah, it is. I mean, the guys who I know who are running Cambium's 60 gigahertz telegraph stuff, like they love it. Yeah, Telegraph. They love it because it's once it's set up and it's running, it's plug and play.
Yeah,
take it out.
I've seen more Telegraph failures. Actually, I was just talking to John Seaman from Cambium about this as well. Where if you're relying on people's houses, the problem is people move and they're not reliable. It's not a network site. But if you can rely on street furniture, right, where you can get, or you've got a good arrangement where you can get a lot of power drops easily, right, and you can stay on that street furniture, which is going to be permanent, and you have the population density to support it, it can work really well. I mean, there are some really giant telegraph networks out there with Cambium's gear. So those are the ones who did the math, did the work up front of engineering it and saying, is this going to pencil out for us? The ones who did that and had the right environment. Absolutely, it can be a success, no doubt about it. Versus the the gear is cheap enough that we can kind of just throw it up wherever we need it. That's the classic ubiquity method. That works for certain types of deployments. It's not the same thing as like a more centrally managed or automated, robust mesh.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, then of course, Dennis is like, use the right tool for the job, and Joshaven Potter popped this. I saw this come up yesterday, and I was like, oh hey,
I haven't read it
yet. So common WISP mistakes, Frankenstein infrastructure. Making throwing out various equipment, using some piece of equipment that is like, oh hey, this works in this one instance really well, and really
he's making my argument for me about the micropops, isn't he?
Yeah. He does talk a lot about micropops being a very you're going to get yourself into trouble. If you aren't very careful with it. And that's the trouble is getting you can get yourself into like you've got 5-10 customers off of this one house, and if that house decides that it doesn't like you anymore, you're in
higher risk, low entrance cost but higher risk.
It's really easy. You have them sign a contract that is transferable. And and therefore, whenever they sell the house, that you have to ensure that they have to list that there is a transferable contract that will be coming with this.
So the thing with that is, I actually, Mark Leman over in Virginia, friend of mine, he just got kicked off of a tower for no. So basically, the guy owned a winery, and he just decided that the tower didn't fit his feelings.
Aesthetic.
Yeah, his aesthetic anymore, and so he lost a couple customers, but he was lucky. Right across the street, another winery was like, "Oh yeah, we'd love free internet. Let's go." So building strong legal agreements really is something that you want to spend energy and time on for all of your infrastructure. And you need to be careful about that though too, because as we just found out, Brother Wisp. Oh, where did that?
I know who you're talking about.
Yeah, Andrew Kaiser. So he put into his agreements that they weren't going to use leaned equipment, and so now he's stuck in that he can't buy leaned equipment for a bunch of his locations that he was going to use to build a anti-bead build. So that's getting him into trouble and his frustrations. So just, be careful about that stuff. What else interesting and fun this week? A little throwback. So I found this a while ago. So this guy,
beautiful picture. I'm admiring it over here on my screen.
Windy Tan. So this guy basically took a spectrum analyzer and watched the negotiation of a modem up, and then broke it out.
For those of us who had internet in the dial-up era, this was we could sing this song, right?
Yes.
I didn't even have internet.
Yeah. So this is a really beautiful graph, and will explain a lot of stuff. Feel free to take a look at it. I was so enthralled by this. I made my wife buy me
the big print.
Yeah, the big print. So you can get it as a poster on your wall, and
we expect to see that in your background when you're
these. It'll be going right there.
No more blurred background.
Awesome.
No more blurred. Well, actually, I can probably unblur. Huh?
Got a whole bunch of stuff back there.
Yeah, not much. Just a heater. Just a heater in my cups. I'm deep into my cups.
Oh dear.
So yeah, that really fun. Just to go ahead and take a look at it. It's beautiful engineering turned into art. With a fun little stuff. Dennis, you were complaining about Hurricane Electric and peering.
It's really not a complaint. Every let me phrase this. Every major provider would do this. It came up a number of years back whenever we were doing BGP with a customer. Basically, Hurricane, and just like many other providers, they will prioritize paid transit versus a peered connection. We recently
Makes sense.
Makes total sense. The only issue is that whenever the paid connection that your upstream is using is relatively slow, let's say 100, 200 meg, versus your 10 gig link to Hurricane on the IX.
So if you have both, and I think this is the case with really anyone, if you have connections to them both via transit and via direct peering,
they will always prefer
things can
peering.
happen with third parties. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So
the issue is not that. It's just you have to remember that yes, you have this nice big 10 gig connection, but you're not going to use the Hurricane peering with Hurricane is not going to adjust any traffic. Let me phrase this: it'll adjust your outbound traffic.
So just so that I'm clear, what's happening is your so you have Hurricane IX, and then you have another upstream connection, and that upstream connection is advertising across a paid connection. So they got transit
that's
from
slower.
Hurricane.
Right.
That's slower. Yeah. And so they're advertising your routes from you to Hurricane. and Hurricane's going this way instead of going over through the IX.
That is correct. And Hurricane does not provide any mechanism to change that.
Okay.
So the classic prepending would be the usual approach, but
it doesn't
still a
matter.
very blunt tool.
Yeah. So the only option that in this particular instance, the correct way, or I would say the best practice way, would be for my transit upstream to give me a community that would delist and remove the advertisement from Hurricane, but it would still go out their other upstreams.
So what
that
they would do,
that would solve it.
Okay, so then what they would do is at each of their peering connections, they would have a filter that says, okay, this
if it matches
route,
this community string.
Yeah, if it matches this community string,
drop it.
And drop it.
A well-designed community BGP setup can do things like, say, if I see this matcher, this community, then drop whatever drop it to whatever the ASN is. You can encode the ASN as part of the community. And so for each peer, you could have a matcher which says, hey, if it matches the peer and matches the drop string, do not advertise. Then don't do that. I have that set up even just here in Alaska, where I have multiple communities, multiple ASNs on an IXB, as well as transit, and I have to do such things to say, hey, use the don't advertise so that it doesn't bork my I don't want to. You don't ever want to become inadvertently transit for somebody else, right?
So this is actually what happened, was that we prepended our prefix and
your transit provider
to our transit provider.
Right.
And what occurred was our transit provider obviously has very, 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 and let me rephrase this again, very simple filters. So my assumption in their filters outbound to Hurricane, it says if it's this prefix, allow it out.
Allow it. Yeah.
Okay. Well, the issue was that when we prepended, they learned our route, but it was not the best route. The best route was from their other transit, Cogent. And then they were advertising that out Hurricane. And of course, they block traffic coming in Hurricane and going out Cogent, as well as traffic coming in Cogent and going out Hurricane on that same router.
Oh, that's funny.
So in that particular case, with the route to me is because it's prepended, it is not the best route. The Cogent learned route ended up being the best route, but because of their filtering, and as they shouldn't allow that cross traffic between the two. It was dropping traffic. Anybody that coming to us from Hurricane was basically going off into limbo and stuff wasn't working. Which
Interesting.
Really stinks.
That would have been difficult to diagnose too, because
it took me about an hour to sit there and go, what the heck's going on? And then I got an email from them saying, hey, here's what we're seeing on our end. Your route is installed, but it's going out Cogent. And I'm like, well, there you go. You're advertising to Hurricane because I can see what Hurricane's getting because they have a nice looking glass system.
Yeah.
And such. It doesn't matter what I put on their router because I'm always going to be a backup because I'm peering. So the two things I could do is, one, I could completely remove all my prefix from my transit provider, or I could simply remove the prepends and make my route the best.
Yeah.
The correct thing would be they should either remove my prefixes from going out Hurricane, which in all practicality, I really would like to have as a backup. And hence, I would much rather have just a community string that I can send. And then that puts me in control of making those changes.
Yeah. And really, it doesn't give you control over their network in any way, shape, or form, as long as they are making certain that their filters from you are only for prefixes that you control.
Something else that is best practice in BGP is any of your downstream BGP peers that you are transiting. In many cases, most ISPs, they actually say, hey, this is a downstream connection, and they're going to append a BGP community onto it. Okay. That way, if whenever you go up to your transits, you say if it's this prefix and it has this community, then we will allow it out. This would have prevented the Cogent learned route from going out Hurricane.
Oh, yeah, and it would have also made it so that you would always be the preferred destination for your packets.
Well, if they would have
routes.
learned my prefix and up the local pref, like most other, again, that's kind of a best practice. Most upstream providers would do that. So it is what it is.
Yeah.
And keep in mind, BGP is
you have
lots of knobs.
There's a lot of knobs, number one, and number two, most people and most engineers in the WISP community, and even in the fiber community, they don't talk BGP. They don't.
No, they just don't have somebody on staff.
Yeah, they don't
really
have.
Understands it. You got to be a tier 2
right.
to really have somebody. Tier 1s rarely do.
Right, and that's
Sorry,
the
tier
issue.
Tier 3s rarely do.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's justifiable because a lot of guys you can get huge and not
need a full-time BGP engineer.
Yeah.
No.
You set up BGP and then you let it go, and it runs and it works fine.
Yeah, I have plenty of customers who I show them the basics of setting up and managing their connection. They aren't ever doing transit to people that they're customers. They're selling to residential, small, medium business. They don't need that most of the time. On occasion I have to jump in and we do something silly, but it's not having somebody on staff is a really big ask for tier 1, tier 2 guys.
So there you go. I mean, we did have a few tower coverage customers call us yesterday. I'm not afraid to mention that. No, hey, did they have connectivity issues? Yes, they did. But we did identify it, and we adjusted our prepins accordingly so that now traffic is still flowing normally, but we're still working with our current upstream to get the matter resolved for future use.
Cool. Speaking of, Greg Soul was learning V7 BGP, and you have a wonderful helpful hit that I didn't even know about. I've been doing V7 BGP for 3 years now, and I didn't know this. Dennis, please.
It's very common. Well, I'll just say the problem is with V7, or one of the problems is it's very difficult to tell the status of what's actually going on with BGP. They've made it a little bit better over time, but very often the GUI can get out of sync with what's happening underneath.
And I'm assuming, like I said, my assumption is that is simply because every time they have to refresh the sessions, they have to get all the route counts. And even though that should be stored in memory, I guess they just don't want to display that. I don't know the reason for that other than that. But basically in BGP sessions, if you are trying to bring up a session, F5. If it's open, just hit F5 and it will refresh that entire screen. Or the BGP sessions.
They're having to close it and reopen it again.
Right.
Yeah.
And that definitely does work. 99, I'm pretty sure it works on other windows, but most of the other windows don't have issues with refreshing.
Yeah,
most of them are live updating.
Right.
Yeah, there's another screen that I've run into that I was like, oh, it's this same bug, but that is super useful. So speaking of products coming out, Ubiquiti EdgePoint S16 is out again, has been re-released. It is a little bit more expensive, but get them while they're hot and available, gentlemen.
So what are the big differences between this and the previous generation?
10
gig?
So
10 gig is the difference?
Yeah, I think it's just the 10 gig and there's some chip. But
it's still not suitable for doing 10 gig distribution on top of a tower.
Layer 2,
it only has 2 ports. It only has 2 ports.
Only 2.
16 PoE ports, but not
16 PoE and 2 10 gigs. Yes.
Yeah.
And these days it's like multi-gig is where it's at, right? You want to be able to not necessarily power. In this case where you're powering a bunch of stuff, no, this makes sense because the multi-gig stuff is unlikely to be powered over Ethernet.
So correct. I'm just going to toss this out there. Does anybody have any good reason other than to fight ubiquity and just piss ubiquity off, why Microtech's NetPower 16 does not do 4-wire PoE out.
It's because you have to. So,
or is that a licensing thing?
No,
It wouldn't be licensing.
It's oh shoot, who's the guy? He always wearing a green shirt at the shows.
Forrest Christian.
Yeah, Forrest Christian. I've talked to him about 4-wire PoE.
He would know.
Yeah, so he says to do a switch with that, you have to isolate each of those because you're doing 4-wire. You have to isolate all 4 pairs.
All 4 pairs.
From the data side has to be isolated
And the
from
power
the power
side. Yep.
And that's hard. And he's been working on it for a couple of years. And I've talked to him pretty extensively about it. It is a pain in the butt and gets expensive really quick. And I think he had wanted to say like last year when I was talking to him, he had a chip and then the company
couldn't get it anymore. Yeah.
Chip
availability is huge. So I'm assuming Microtech, even though they build a lot of stuff themselves, I'm assuming they have the same problems. And then also they're trying to keep the cost down.
Right.
There are other ways to drive power for those. Like the pass through PoE. We have what Christian does.
Yeah, we have I think it's either made by Tycon or Cytel. I don't remember which one, but it's like the little 24 eyes that we used to use,
APC.
Yeah, have them forever. But basically, you just plug 2 PoE ins into it from the net power, and you turn one. You have to force one on, and one's data in PoE power, and the second one adds your other your other 2 pairs, and it'll power pretty much anything at that point in time.
Huh.
It seems to make sense to do more standards compliant stuff and then use converters for your weirder stuff. I don't think it's a question about sliding ubiquity. It's that it's like Ubiquity was the one who cost, and it was Ubiquity was the one who did the kind of non-compliant thing, if you will.
Yeah.
I mean, admittedly, it's been really nice to have gear that just can do everything. I've got I've got Microtech switches, and it's like the all of the different potential possibilities historically over the years, I get annoyed and tired, and I'd be like, I'm just not going to deal with this.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you look at the net power 16, and you look at the edge point. The current edge point price. What was the old price? $499.
Yeah, I think it's not much more expensive.
It's $579 now.
Yeah.
So you're almost looking at $600, where the net power is $279.
They're different products.
Yeah, completely different products. But I just, that's just one of those oddball things. We get a lot of customers say, well, I need to do this, I need to do that. Well, you can toss things in for those little items that you need. But most of our customers, they're not even using the air fiber, what is it, the air fiber 24s or the air fiber 11s. They're using the multi-gig stuff, which requires their own power supply anyway.
Right.
And I'm like, I don't even know why you're even worried about it.
And exactly, you got to look at the total cost of ownership. I was doing this even just with my home lab, where I wanted to add some more multi-gig servers, and adding in a multi-gig switch didn't really make sense in my environment because I already do 10 gig. So I just added more 10 gig ports, and I use a 2.5 gig module. It works just fine in a 10 gig. A 10 gig slot. So rather than try to make I looked at the actual cost per port of converting, or using a module rather than having it be built in. And so it really did pencil out that since I was not going to go wholesale do a ton of multi-gig. So.
Yeah, I really feel like on the tower, more and more guys are getting comfortable running fiber up the tower. And I feel like
in
multi-gig doing split.
No FM interference on that.
Yeah, but the thing is, like, guys, we've all had to do diagnostics on wires, PoE wires going up towers.
Figure out which ones were broken, which end. I mean, I still have my little ether tool. What was it? Yeah. The Germans. What was it?
Oh. Something friend. NetBuddy.
No, I'll have to look it up because it's going to annoy me.
I just seen a meme that had a tester, and it showed the pinouts of each side, and it was some wires are crossed, and everything was
Everything was crossed.
everything was connected.
Yeah.
I was like,
Yeah.
all right, that's pretty good.
That's brilliant. Yeah, I love that one. I was when I saw that, I'm like, ooh, yep, that's bad cable. Yes, I've looked, and you still can't buy that. I'm guessing there's some sort of, once again, it was another chip that, because I emailed them last year. I was like, hey, I want to buy these. How can I do it? And that didn't happen. But no, so everybody's had to do diagnostics, and tower climbing and diagnostics is expensive. Fiber,
right.
power
Buying the right
cables,
tools makes a lot of sense, because it's the tower climbs that are expensive, not the tools.
Yeah. Fiber's just getting super cheap on radios. And let's see, Ubiquity products are coming with SFP ports. We
Finally, Mike can be happy. Hammett can be happy.
But Hammett is dancing in his underwear.
Well, I don't know that Hammett will ever be truly happy, but at least he won't be able to complain about that one anymore.
Yes. No. He is the eternal grump. Everything is ever.
He's
perfect.
just trying to make it better for the rest of us.
Correct.
I was talking with Microtech about doing a what is it, a WDM fiber switch. But the economies of scale is probably not going to have that happen. So
yeah, and there's just so like it just starts getting very complicated.
Well, I mean, you can fit. They said they can fit 112 strands, so 112 gigabit ports in a 1U module, and then they can add a pair of 100 gigs on the end. But the problem is that now you don't get modules. There's no SFPs. Right. They're all integrated into the system, and heat is an actual issue at that point in time.
Yeah. Microtech doesn't have many product heat generators.
Yeah. So, but you never know. They whenever I'm talking with them, they listen quite a bit, but the whole 2.5 gig PoE outports, that's the answer is it's coming, but it's not coming quick enough. So
and it's the same thing as doing PoE over 10. Like the faster the higher the modulation, that's more stringent the requirements get. Like it's non-linear scaling. Like you think, well, that should just be, it should just add be a little bit faster. Yeah, exactly. No, it's not. It's non-trivial. It's definitely one of those things where you really wonder whether that what you should be doing that, just because even 10 gig over copper already generates so much heat itself, to then add power on top of that. It's
and we don't do any 99.9% of our 10 gig is either DAC cables or fiber. I mean, we don't do any of it.
That's the way to go. I do as little of it as I can over Twisted Pair.
Yeah.
It's just not useful.
Yeah,
correct.
So.
Well, the big news we're saving for the last here, Tommy.
Introduce me. Go for it.
Well, I happened to see on WISP Talk an actual unboxing video of ISO horns as a shipping product.
Yes, it is here.
I think those are demos.
In multiple. Yeah, no, I think that's
actual shipping.
That's the actual shipping product.
And of course, people are immediately arguing about the where to put the radio and how to connect. The comparison to other products. And they're saying, well, it's a different product. It may not. It's not it should be different from the other one, right?
Yeah,
right.
But the thing is that people have gotten used to the main competitor in this space,
primary,
and what they like and what they enjoy, and they want everything to match that.
Which doesn't make sense to me.
No.
It's it might not be the thing for you, but I wouldn't complain that it doesn't have that. It's like, okay, that's going to be different, right? Like there needs to be there may be somebody who really wants that feature of the new one, ISO horns, and has been complaining about it, and they just haven't been vocal about it. I don't know. I'm there's a reason why, when I look at, I'm comparing software products to say, well, I don't want them to be identical, because otherwise, how are you going to compare them?
Yeah,
just on price alone, service alone. That's
I remember they had a anonymous member make a post, and this was on WISP Talk, that they had a questionnaire. And the questionnaire said, the fine folks at ISO Horns, whoever they are, believe that they have been treated unfairly. Yes or no? And the no was like 91% of the vote in the no was no, their constant posting was distracting and took away from the group. So I understand trying to get your name out there, but also the arguments was kind of getting nuts.
Yeah.
Well, it was nice to see at WISP America that has really all died down, and it was civil.
Yeah.
And I really, it just was non-news at the show, which is good. Like that, we don't need that kind of distraction. Like, let's just have a let's be adults here, and let the products succeed or fail on their merits.
Yeah, there you go.
And I think I was very glad of how that cleaned up.
So what is? I guess my question is, what is their claim to fame?
So really
is it just another horn vendor? I mean,
wider band, I believe, right?
Very wide band spectrum.
So 90 degrees.
No,
wide band as far as frequency usage.
Correct, because the idea, I think, was that we've got 6 gigahertz coming out, and you want to be able to do things like run 5 and 6 on the same horn.
Right.
Yeah, and there's going to be a diplexer.
Well, that was my question, but I haven't looked at the spec sheets.
Yeah.
My assumption would be always that the wider the band, the less, the lower the specificity here, to kind of use a layman's term.
Yeah. That, though, in some of the early testing, there was notable SNR improvements, going head to head with similar antennae.
Well, like third-party testing.
Well, no, of course not.
Ooh, they are.
Well, it was testing with third parties involved, but those third parties were not.
I know how hard it is to develop a really truly A/B test. So I wasn't confident that we ever really saw results of that. It's because
everyone was able to. People were able to pick them apart. There was definitely.
Well, it's hard because you got to get the angle exactly the same. All the clients, of course, have to be the same. You got to be running the same output power. Everything. It's even given that there are differences of connectors, and it's more. Right. I think what will end up happening is we'll end up seeing more results from a wider array, and so you'll get a clearer picture of what it's like in a wider variety of circumstances.
Yeah. Well, and then lastly, but they did. The ISO Horns guys did appear at least to be trying to make a fair comparison.
I never doubted that. I was just saying it was difficult to do. I wasn't ever. I don't think anybody was.
So
I was just trying to see the specs on the antennas.
So you should be able to look at the patterns now. They should be available for both, right? I know for a long time they weren't, and so that was a lot of the dispute. Was
so 16. So they're saying 18 dB gain on a frequency range of 4.9 to 7.2 gigahertz at 90
but you need to see the whole curve. Yeah, you need to see the whole curve, and then you need to see the fall off, both azimuth and elevation.
Yeah, they actually and keep them. Well, that's a good point. Yeah. At 90 degrees. So at 90 degrees. This is on ISO Horn's website. At 90 degrees, you have a 20 dB fall off on all the bands, which is what they should. But at 60 degrees, you have a 10 dB fall off at 7.2, 14 dB at 6 gigahertz, and almost a 20 dB at 4.9 gigahertz.
So
you wouldn't really want to call it a 90?
I wouldn't want to call that a 90.
Well, typically it's
45
60 is your fall off. Yeah, it's a 45, right?
Yeah, so 45.
But they're saying it's a 90.
Well,
and let's see, which one is this? Yeah, at 45 degrees, you're at 4.9 gigahertz. You're at -12 fall off.
Yeah.
You're really close. So at 7.2, you're at -6.
So it's pretty flat. It's pretty flat across the band.
So your gain across the band.
This is not great podcast material. We're talking about the
15 dB at 4.9, and then up in the 7.2s at 19. It peaks up around 19.9.
Okay, so picking a gain is going to matter depending on the band.
Yeah.
Because that was always the case, even with the RF elements, dishes, and horns, as always.
Less so much.
Look at your edges of the band. Well, they were pretty flat. I'm just saying, like you have to figure out what frequency you're going to run them at, and then that becomes the active gain for you. Like there was they certainly never tried to hide any of that. That's the case with any antenna. It's not going to have a flat response across its entire usable bandwidth.
But RF elements was mind blowing for me as a provider, just because going from the ubiquity patch panels,
right?
The gain in, especially from horizontal to vertical, change. That it was consistent across the spectrum, horizontal versus vertical. Was huge. The other thing that ISO Horns really was pushing and saying is a big benefit, and is that they have a very low VSWR, which is the reflection of noise back at the radio,
standing wave.
That's what's being transmitted. So that is mitigated a lot. Perfect would be one. That there's no perfect in the radio world, and they have a 1.5 versus what they claim RF elements having is
just so you know, ISO Horns is significantly more pricey.
Yes.
Where RF elements, I'm just going to use them. Their 360 is what their 90-degree sector, and ISO Horns 899.
Yeah.
So
now that's before, if you don't buy in bulk. If you buy in bulk, you can get, you get 10 or more, it's $349. 11 or more, it's $299 per unit.
Yeah.
So
that's a pretty significant drop, but you'd want to test it, right?
Yeah.
I can't say that the market couldn't support a premium antenna for specific applications, but my assumption is also that RF Elements works hard to optimize that for demand.
Yeah. And also keep in mind, when you look at cell phone providers, they're using $2,000 antennas, because they have multiple bands in them. They have, 16 freaking cables going to the dang things. Yeah. And I'm actually really surprised that a multi-band active element antenna for, I hate to say, 24365 and 5 gigahertz has not been promoted in the industry. Yes, it would be an expensive antenna, but you could put up one antenna for everything.
The trouble is that this industry is run by people who are
cheap,
very price. They're
very
price conscious.
Yes.
But the thing is a lot of guys are looking for a year and a half, 2 years of ROI for their tower builds, because they're funding this with their own money. They don't have extra cash floating around.
Right.
So I get it. I could see an active in a race like that would be nice, but if I can,
never know. You never know.
Duplicate that. And some portion of that as well is not many guys are fighting with limited tower space.
Well, I was more thinking of, especially on cell tower installations, you typically negotiate your contract based on the number of antennas, not, and that's based on the wind load of the antennas, not the actual number of radios.
Correct. Yes. It's
so
the wind, yes,
if you could put up 4 sectors that have excellent, 365, 24, 5 gig, and 6 gigahertz coverage, now you're only paying for 3 sectors. Yes, your wind load might be a little higher because they're going to be bigger, but still.
Yeah.
I don't know. I see pictures all the time of people putting up 12 and 16 horns. You can't tell me, the wind load on those has to be probably just as much as those 4 sectors would be. And you don't have any active properties in it.
True. So,
but you also get a lot more gain, and you get a lot more isolation between each one. I'm pretty sure that's why Ubiquiti made that big old huge honking thing that stood that tall. I don't even know what
Yeah.
the hell what that they had like
That was
3
the
sectors in it or
N90,
something.
yeah, the N390 or something like that.
Yeah,
Yeah, I had one. It was awesome.
yeah.
It was terrible and awesome at the same
Yeah, yeah.
time.
You could stand in it. I could anyway, because I was,
Yeah.
I wouldn't fit in it, but I could stand. It was taller than me.
Yeah.
So
All right. Well, I think we're about there. That's all the stuff I had. Jeremy, if people want to reach you out on the internet, how do they do that?
Oh, all kinds of places. You can certainly find me on LinkedIn. I often do not post. I don't post a ton, so it's pretty low or pretty high signal noise ratio if you do follow me. I'm also available via email at jeremy@preseam.com or jeremy@adderlow.com, and I keep an eye out on WISP Talk. I join a few conversations, but I don't often start them. I'm really just kind of busy making things happen over here at Preseam with the fantastic team we've got. But and then I can also put in a slight plug for our own podcast. We have a Preseam podcast where we mostly don't talk about Preseam a little bit. We talk about things that are a little more specific to the kind of the quality of experience side, more than we do here on the Brothers WISP. So, and again, we don't put out episodes very often, so it's a pretty hopefully high quality when we do. So I can just encourage that as well. We've had some fun guests on, and hope to continue that in the future.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, no problem. Dennis, how do people reach you?
you can email me, Dennis@linktext.net, LANKTECHS.net, or call our office 314-735-0270. Of course, we do have people who actually answer the phone. We have sales staff that can help you with anything as well. Or you can visit our website, linktext.net.
All right. Well,
Or tirecoverage.com. Take your pick.
Tire coverage,
hit them up. All right. Well, you guys know how to reach me. LostCreek.tech, Tommy at LostCreek.tech. The Brothers WISP, we're on Facebook, Twitter, all the fun stuff. Mike's there. So reach out, say hi. And patreon.com/The Brothers WISP. We're still there. And we really appreciate your support. Take care, everybody.
Thanks, Tommy. Bye-bye.
You're now listening to Greg, it's the Brothers WISP. Let's take a ride through space on this mothership. Wireless networking, we talk about equipment and methodology, so sit back and start learning. Lighten up the tower so people can start searching. Shooting up the web in neighborhoods, net surfing. We got horrible jokes, we're loud and annoying, but we're informative facts, we're not disappointing. Just give us a listen, cause fun is the mission. I'm telling you, you don't know what you are missing. Ideas and some good comedy given. If you missed the show already, don't worry, you're forgiven.